Oshtave, radiant peace and happiness to everybody. And in this video, I'm going to explain how, from a standpoint of how I perceive the Gothas, I have come to the conclusion of being more liberally minded in my political stance. Now, before I begin, like I said in a previous video, anything political that may show up on this channel, I don't want to claim that this is all of Zoroastrianism and how Zoroastrians think. That's not for me to say. So I just want to make a disclaimer that this is just me and how, through my own understanding of the Gothas, have come to this standpoint. The beauty of the Gothas, though, is that it is composed in a way that is simple enough, and it's not this strict blueprint on what to believe or what to think, but more of an instruction manual on how to take care of your mind and how to think better. When you do Zoroastrian meditations, when you do Zoroastrian serenity meditations, it not only improves the intuition, but it improves the logic as well. Because it taps into the center of the mind, which I would call Vohumana, which is the good mind, which watches over the logical, which is Spenta Menu, the progressive mentality, and Sarosha, which is the intuition. So through awareness of logic and intuition, you develop a sense of what is just and unjust. And that would be Vohumana, the good mind. Now, Spenta Manu, which is often used as the definition of good in Zoroastrianism, often, a very common translation to it is the progressive mentality. And to me, what this is saying is that in order for a human system, a human idea to be righteous, it has to constantly be evolving and progressing with the times. This is not perfection, though. This is not perfection, but mere a constant progression, a constant improvement. I remember reading Watchmen, the Watchmen graphic novel, which is one of my favorite all-time comic book stories ever told, written by Alan Moore. And this you will not see in the Watchmen movie or in the Watchmen TV show, but in the Watchmen comic book, there was an interview with the character Ozymandias. And in this interview, he said, "I'm not striving for a perfect utopia, but more of a society where we aren't trying to solve the same problems today that we were trying to solve yesterday." And to me, that very much hit on the nail the definition of Spenta Manu. Now, debatably, Ozymandias may have been a villain in the story. He did save a lot of lives. I mean, it's I highly recommend reading Watchmen. It's a very relevant comic book, even though it was written during the Cold War era. It's very relevant today in terms of issues going on, and I've met both liberals and conservatives who enjoy it. So, but that's all to your own conclusion. But I guess the thing is that usually when I hear the conservative viewpoint, they're, they'll often use a term that makes things fixed. Kind of like, kind of like, well, capitalism is necessary because it's human nature to be competitive. There you go, they're making it fixed. It's human nature. And the thing is, I have a hard time with this because, A, that's only one aspect of human nature. Sure, human nature is naturally, there is competition in human nature, but there's also cooperation in human nature. And throughout the thousands, actually, throughout the millions of years of our evolution has depended more on cooperation than it has on competition, just by the fact that we are a social animal who lives in communities. Most primates are social animals. The only two primates I could think of that are not social, and studying anthropology, I also had to study primatology. So the only primates I could really think of that are not social are the lemur, as well as the orangutan. But other than that, our two closest relatives, the chimps and the bonobos, they're both pretty social creatures. They do have communities. In many ways, the bonobo society is the opposite of a chimp, because bonobos are pretty peaceful and cooperative, and chimps are very hierarchical, very patriarchal. So, but anyway, all that aside, the other problem I have with using this, it's human nature, which I often hear as a big conservative argument, is that it assumes that nature is somehow fixed, that nature is in stasis, and in truth, scientifically, the only constant that we can count on is change. And yeah, maybe in our current society, the way we know it, things are pretty hectic, things are pretty competitive, there's lots of wars going on. But it's kind of like, just because maybe war is a problem that we're trying to solve today, doesn't mean that it has to be a problem that we're trying to solve tomorrow. Oh, well, we're always going to have war. Well, how do you know we're always going to have war? You don't, because no one can predict the future. I don't buy into the superstitious, predetermined stuff. And I think Zarathustra, when promoting the progressive mentality, he himself recognized that things are not predetermined, and that when you align yourself with Asha compatibility, which is compatibility with the truth, with nature, which nature is never in stasis, with good science. Because yes, in Zoroastrianism, good science is essential. It's essential to good ethics. You cannot have good ethics without good science. So that is why I take the stance that I take. Because since I recognize the uncertainty of life, since I recognize that nothing is predetermined, that in order to be Asha compatible, I must do my part right here and right now to work to make the world a better place, so that our children and our grandchildren don't have to deal with poverty, so that our children and grandchildren don't have to deal with war, so that our children and our grandchildren can live in a sustainable planet with clean water and clean air, so that our children and grandchildren don't have to deal with racism, so that our children and our grandchildren don't have to do with gender inequality. And when I say equal, I don't mean the same. Masculine and feminine may be different things, androgynous may be a different thing, but that does not mean unequal. And let me explain this. Let's say I go to a convenience store. I buy a can of Coke for $1.80. I guess that's the price nowadays, like around $1.80. After that, I go buy a bag of chips for $1.80. They're both different things, but they are of equal value. So that's pretty simple. And I think part of the problem with trying to have equality of, specifically of genders, is that especially in the United States, we tend to assume that equal means the same. Well, I saw an interview that Michael Moore had with some women bankers in Iceland, and they said, well, it just makes sense that the women would run the banking system because it's in our DNA. We don't want our children to starve, and we don't want other mothers' children to starve. See, that's an example of where differences are a necessity to have a stable society. So yeah, that's basically why I tend to be more left-leaning. Because since the future has not happened yet, I don't want to assume that we're always going to have war, that we're always going to have poverty, that we're always going to have racism. Instead, I want to work in the present to make it so that we're trying to solve different problems tomorrow. Radiant peace and happiness to everybody, and Ushta Ve.